Today, my interview with Alex Heller of Watch. Alex is the head of sales and business development for Watch, responsible for the go-to-market activities for the company. In his role, Alex works with independent power producers, IPPs, long-term asset owners, and EPCs to help maximize the performance of their solar and storage fleet of assets, primary in the C&I and distributed generation market segments. Before joining Watch as head of sales in 2023, Alex spent a decade building and leading sales teams in the healthcare technologies and logistics industries, including companies like Athena Health, Flexport. Alex and Watch are based in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, Watch is a next-generation platform for control, monitoring, and intelligence of distributed solar and storage. Based in Atlanta, Georgia, Watch focuses on helping owners of distributed energy projects maximize performance, minimize downtime, and deliver actionable intelligence to operators and asset managers. Watch manages projects in over 27 states and 3 countries and has nearly 1,500 projects connected to its network. Stay tuned for the interview on the What's Up Solar podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to What's Up Solar Podcast. And that's WATTS, What's Up Solar Podcast. A couple of months ago, I was at a show and this interesting gentleman walked over to me and said, "You're Emmitt." And I said, "Yeah." He says, "I'm Alex." He's like, "We need to talk." He didn't say we need to talk, but you kind of felt it in the air. And we sat down and we had a little chat. And we've been chatting ever since. Alex Heller works with Watch. But I always think it's interesting to talk to the people in the industry to know what they do, to know where they came from, and to know their spiritual perspective on things. So, what's up, Alex?
Hey, Emmitt. Thanks for having me today. It's nice to talk to you, and I'm happy we got together today.
What brought you to solar? Wait, hold on. Let me preface that. You have solar in your family, but we're not going to get into that. But what brought you to this space?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people, various range of time they've been in industry. Although the thing I've loved most about the renewable energy industry is still has a large chunk of people that have been in the space for a while. It's been through a lot of boom and bust cycles, but relatively speaking, it's fairly younger in terms of experience. I think like I saw some stat a couple months ago that like the average tenure in the space is around 4 years, give or take. And so I liked early on that it was a very welcoming, open industry to newcomers, and I think really welcomed a lot of talent and expertise and things that people could bring to it to advance the cost of the space. But I'm relatively new to it. I came in just over 2 years ago. My background for a decade leading up to that was in software as a service platforms and a couple other verticals, healthcare technology, logistics technology, things like that. But I liked those industries. I thought they were very intellectually interesting, solving, I think, big macro problems. But I'll be honest, I mean, like I don't know necessarily that I felt the deep connection to them the way that I really wanted. And as I was looking for an opportunity a couple of years ago, it became clear to me that I wanted to do something that I felt was uh, important in a bigger way.
Yeah.
And so I had a couple initial introductions to some, let's call it climate tech type companies, and not in renewables, but in like carbon accounting and some other things that I was like, okay, this is more my speed, but not exactly the right thing.
Right.
And it just happened to come from a chance introduction to the team here at Watch. And yeah, I thought I could see where the overlap was between my skills, helping grow software companies and the renewable space. And it's a great match.
What's dawned on me in the last, I'd say I've been introduced to it over 3 years, but it really hit home in the last year is how important data is becoming in the renewable space. Because before it was like, we have monitoring. Okay. We don't care. We're getting paid regardless. So, meh. But now data is playing such an important role in not only the acquisition of your dollars or accounting, but O&M, predictability, modeling. Uh, was that some of the things that brought you into this space, or things that you were thinking about with Watch?
Yeah, as I got more into it, and did more research into, what had been occurring and what was the norm in the space, a couple big themes emerged to me. One, I think data itself is very helpful, and everyone says like, of course you need good data on
That's
whatever it is you're
it's a
doing.
good data.
I think everybody says that. So first of all, like describing like what good data is, like, is there a definition on like what constitutes that? Because just all data is not the same, but good data really drives outcomes for people. And those can be, to your point, financial outcomes. Hey, we want to ensure that we get a expected high return on this asset or this portfolio of assets that we financed, because once we hit our goals, we can then redeploy that capital into the next
Um,
tranche of
yeah,
things. So I think that's really interesting. I also think on the operator side, there are tons of amazing, well-trained people in the space, but one, like renewables has a talent sort of shortage, and so there are never going to be enough people. Uh, there aren't currently enough people to do all the work that's necessary to build
yeah,
and keep up the assets that we've got. So how do you use good data to um, make the most out of the skilled teams that you've got? How do you help them manage a growing number of assets, whether it's, again, financial analysis, technical operations and maintenance? How do you allow people to do the best work of their lives without burning them out, without running them into the ground? And then, of course, how can you use that data to better train and attract the next group of people that need to come into the space? So I think being good on the data side has financial outcomes, it has operational outcomes, it has quality of life and like helping people
yeah.
uh, do amazing work. And so all of that stuff sort of, I didn't necessarily know it at the time when I joined, but I had this sense that if you could provide better high quality data around, performance optimization, asset health, I thought there were a lot of good things that could come out of that, and that really like juiced me up and like got me really excited.
And this is a good one though, because there are major players, or there's go-tos. Like in automotive industry, you have Ford, GM, or
Mhm.
historically you had them.
Yeah.
But what made Watts say we can do this?
So I think you're right. I think that the space has over time had a number of innovative companies and people that were doing interesting stuff that consolidated, like all industries tend to do, and they tend to roll up a lot of those people into a couple major folks. And I think, your listeners and the people that are, listening to this probably know kind of who some of those companies are. They're the go-tos.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think that that gives an opportunity for more nimble, agile, progressive thinking companies to come in and deliver something different. I
Yeah.
think that's there's always this opportunity to come in and disrupt those like highly concentrated industries, with newer players that have a different take on it. And so 5 years ago, when the founders of Watch decided they wanted to come into the space, there were a number of people that said, this problem's already been solved. Like
Yeah.
there's no need to come do it. But I think when they talked to customers and, we were really trying to formulate where we wanted to point the company, where they wanted to point the company, uh, it became clear that there was an opportunity to provide a better service first and foremost. Like, how can you better serve the needs of the people that are in the field, the people that are installing,
Yeah.
DAS hardware, that are out there optimizing sites? And then we also thought that you can build a new company based on more modern technology, right? There are plenty of things in a ton of different sectors that you can do now that you couldn't do 5, 10 years ago, right? And I think if you think about where you build your offerings and what is the basis that you build them on, um, we just thought that there were more things that you could help people do with newer technology. Like, one example of that is just the ability to have more focused diagnostics and control settings for smaller
That's
projects.
that's a big one.
Yeah, like for us, I think monitoring, and Watch doesn't necessarily describe ourselves as a monitoring company per se. I think we see ourselves as a certainly a intelligence, a controls, and a monitoring company. Monitoring is one of the things we do, but we thought like monitoring usually just involves pushing data somewhere. Like, we're going to send production data on one site, on 100 sites, someplace, and it'll be tabulated, it'll be processed, it'll be put together. But we thought like, hey, what if, for example, you can bring a lot of the sophistication and the intelligence of larger sites and infuse that into smaller commercial sites, DG sites, so that you can have more tooling to improve the performance of that asset, do
Mm.
things to troubleshoot the site, and take action against the site remotely. And that seemed like a great opportunity. And one of the things that we saw is like, hey, if we can go into the market and deliver more capabilities for projects like this, there will inherently be value to the owners that
You
operate
know,
them.
I here's the thing. Before a couple of months ago, I had heard of Watch, just kind of heard because I was doing all this troubleshooting through monitoring platforms and stuff like that, right? But it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing until 60 Hertz was like, watch, 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 watch. And that's when we got together through this mutual, but that's how solar is. You're like,
Mhm.
it's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but solar is the Kevin Bacon, and we are all the players that are connected to each other. With all this information, uh, this allows you to do more stuff because before, like you said, information was grabbed, it kind of was stored for a little bit. If you know, like 30 days, depending on how much data you got. And then it was sent to a cloud somewhere, never to be seen again once it got erased. So you're saying that this ecosystem changes a lot of that because now it's kind of integrated with a DAS system. Here's my question for you. Do you find people don't really understand DAS systems?
Uh, I think there, like all things, there is a wide range of understanding of, you know, what is data acquisition strategy and what are all the different options available to me to um, process and keep and analyze data from,
Yeah.
you know, a solar project or a battery project. Um, and I think sometimes on the side where people have a little bit less knowledge, a little bit less sophistication, I think they just say, I have something that I have some place where my production data is kept, and like
Yeah.
that's good enough. And I think a big part of what we try to do, and I think other people like you mentioned, other newer players, you know, in the technology space within clean tech, it's there are different sort of hierarchies or levels of information. There's
Yeah.
different levels of sophistication. You know, just getting production data from an inverter is fine. And I think for you know, you have a single project, you're a residential, you know, homeowner. Um, Perfectly fine. Like all you really care about is like, is my system on? Is it
Yeah.
producing? You know, but I think as you begin to go up the ladder of complexity, you know, you care a lot more about making, you know, spend and operations and maintenance decisions on, you know, the performance of the asset versus
Um,
its ideal or its expected,
yeah.
right? Homeowner's just going to decide, hey, my system's been off for a week. I'm probably going to call someone to get out and come do service.
No, true.
Um, on a you know, on a 1 megawatt or 2 megawatt like big warehouse distribution center, you know, a 10 or 20% loss very easily on a monthly basis could be 4 times the cost of service.
Do you know what's funny about that is so I'm giving this talk at the Midwest Renewable. So my nerdy self creates a loss calculator based on things that you input that I'm going to have people like pull up and actually do. And the reason I did this is so that they can understand how much money is being lost. I mean, because some of these sites, I believe the average is about 5 cents kilowatt hour, depending on for like farms and stuff like that. And you're
Mm.
like thinking that's not that much money. But when you think of it in scale, you're like, whoa, that's a day, that's a month, that's a quarter. Like, yes. So understanding these systems is critically important in how to deploy and keep it up. Um, SCADA systems. I always think about SCADA, DAS, and data. Do you see that more of an integration into the renewable sector now? Because now you could have a wind farm, you could have a PV farm, you could have a building management. I mean, you could build a business around data
Mhm.
and data management and acquisition. Looking at all those things. So Do you have the ability to import this information for a SCADA system that is deployed for instance, if you have PV on a building that has the temperature controls built into it, is that data
Mhm.
all integratable?
Yeah, I think there's an ideal version that a lot of people, particularly your example, I think is much more in line with a lot of the larger, like call it Fortune, 400, 500 companies that, have a lot of physical real estate assets or things that they want to. They will typically be some of your highest level of sophistication in terms
Yeah.
of how do we get all of our various assets to talk together and integrate and come up with a complete solution. A lot of them that want to do sustainability goals, they will look at energy and sustainability in kind of one big sphere. So those people I think are asking for this type of integration you're talking about now, and I think there's lots of other people that don't even yet know that they have all of this siloed data in a couple different places.
Right.
But yeah, I think that there's a role certainly to be played in being able to help facilitate the exchange of data across a bunch of different silos for us. So I'll give you an example of like one of our larger corporate customers. So we have a one of the Fortune 500 companies that has a lot of small regional offices that they
Mm.
have throughout the U.S. And so and we have somewhere like around uh, 80 to 100 of their regional locations. So these are relatively small sites. From a solar perspective, they're probably 50 to 100 kilowatt systems. But what they want to be able to do is take in solar as one part of their sustainability strategy. They want to take energy efficiency from their buildings and be able to take that and put it together in sort of a larger narrative of like, what is this company doing to be a good corporate citizen, drive
Oh, that's
sustainability
nice.
efforts, things like that.
Yeah.
And so we think while we're not necessarily playing the role of taking all of those different things and us being the holder of it, we do think it's really important of making sure that your data has high amounts of accuracy, integrity, and you can let it flow to other places where it can be consolidated. So in this example, um, we've made it very easy for the solar data to be packaged up and optimized in a way that can be added to building automation,
Mm.
HVAC, things like that.
Yeah, that
They're
yeah.
they're man- they're managing it somewhere else. But put it this way, Emmett, I think one of the problems in the industry right now is that everybody tries to keep their stuff sort of separate and not
Yes.
allow it to go elsewhere.
So yeah, that is a big thing. Well, that's that's America. Silos.
There's value. I get it. Like commercially, there's a lot of value um, in being able, like if you've done all the work of building out really solid data models, categorizing it, making it very clean and usable by people, there's value in that. But I also think, you don't want to hold that up. For example, like in our space, you brought up like 60, something like 60 hertz, or like solar grade or some of those
Yeah.
like some of the companies that do a lot of the ticketing and the ability to do work order management. We think it's really important for someone that owns a whole bunch of solar assets to be able to have data on how the site's performing, its health, what we would consider in monitoring, and make sure that that can be used in other different entities and used by those entities. And so we believe that you will help customers get the best outcomes if you can enable them to use the data to make good decisions and act on them. And so for us, it's like the data should just flow about your assets downstream to the where you're actually going to fix things and categorize like the actions that you take, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So with that, does that lead into digital twins?
Yeah, I think that could be a good segue for us.
So you brought this subject up, I think, or I've heard it about digital twin. Explain
Mhm.
that to me.
Yeah, so very hot topic. We'll say I remember a couple even between last time I saw you and today. I was at the Solar Plaza Asset Management event about a month ago in San Diego, and there was a whole topic on digital twins. So I think very very top of mind in the renewable space now. So concept of a digital twin is just being able to create a digital recreation of a physical site, device, or object. And so
Mm.
in our space, it means how can you take a solar asset, a solar plant, could be a rooftop site, could be a front of the meter community solar site, and create a digital copy of that that you can You can put in different assumptions, different estimates, different information used to simulate conditions on what an asset should do under different scenarios. There's a lot of use cases for it.
Wait, wait,
The
wait.
one, yeah,
I'm sorry. So here's what came to mind as you were explaining this.
yeah,
This is usually in the design phase. You create a clone, basically, as
hmm
close as you can. I'm thinking, Aurora, Solar, whoever. You're sitting there designing this. You're looking at the area. You're looking at the azimuth. You're looking at tilt of things. You're looking at tree lines, shading, grade of the ground, all these things. How does that differ from a digital twin?
yeah. It has a lot of the similarities, right? I think like when you design solar projects or solar and battery projects, you are putting together not only the physical design, but what is the optimal way to build it,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think like, Aurora, Helioscope, PV case, like lots of companies that do that on the front end. I think the one of the opportunities we saw is how do you extend that level of analysis and optimization, not just when you plan the building of
Ah,
the asset, but actually when it runs, when it actually is an operation. So, you know, people will position the concept of a digital twin for a lot of different use cases beyond just renewable energy, tons of different other sectors of the economy. But for Watch, we thought the opportunity and where we could utilize a digital twin was to extend the simulation that you would do in the design phase and put that into operation. So for us, a digital twin specifically means how do we create a bottoms up physics simulation of really like at the cell level on a site, like at the
oh
at the
my
PV cell. What
goodness.
should what should every cell be doing at any given time? And then how can you use that to add cells up into modules into strings, into MPPTs, into inverters, so on. So what it means is that if you start at the lowest level with a real-time simulation, it means that what Watch can help an asset owner do is essentially say, not like what's an estimate of what my site should be producing right now, but again, go all the way back down, like start at the bottom. What should the single PV cell be producing based on the temperature, the irradiance on the site, the physical layout of the site? What is the orientation of that cell?
Yeah.
Uh, and then calculate that in real time, which, hasn't been done historically a lot because of the complexity in keeping all this information, the compute power necessary to run this on. Think about it. Like think about a 1 megawatt site. Like how many PV cells are you talking about?
Yeah.
On that. But that's where you can use new technology to do that kind of simulation. So you can, at a 10-second, at a 1 second interval, even you can say this site um, is producing what it should or not down to a margin of error of plus or minus 1%.
That's
Um,
that's pretty good. If you're on a megawatt site or even 250 kilowatt site, and you can predict that because I'm thinking about it, these usually cover an expansive area. There's differences in temperature from one end to the other, height, lower. There's a lot of variables, and you're basically creating the solar sims. You remember the game The Sims?
yeah,
You're looking at every little thing that affects the actual character and the character's actual PV array, the inverter, the system itself. That's that's a lot of data to crunch, but it's extremely valuable not only for the giving you performance ratios, but um, it gives you a learning a learning model for future things as well.
yeah. I think we did a blog post and I did a talk at NABCEB, which was around just like different KPIs that you can use as a solar
Right.
asset manager and operations and maintenance provider. And there are a ton of different KPIs that you can use, ranging from performance ratio, predicted, versus typical meteorological year data, up to energy performance index. And so there's a range of different historical KPIs you could use. The concept of the digital twin is, and how Watch is employing it is, I think, one of the most powerful KPIs that you can use to optimize these assets, mainly because you're not taking a what do we think the data, the weather and the irradiance looks like over a typical year. And we always know that like that data is not truly representative, like
Yeah.
on any given day, right? You can
Yeah.
find trends in weeks and months and years. But, for a lot of people I talked to, I met a I met an EPC, a couple months ago, and I asked this person like, hey, how long does it typically take you to find performance problems on, the assets that you're doing O&M for? And he's like, to be honest, there are times when like it goes 2 or 3 months before it becomes clear to me that there's a real problem. Like we see production, we don't see any like critical
Yeah.
alerts or failures from the devices, but it's just underperforming in a way. And so digital twins and this kind of KPI, because you're second by second, you're able to compare actual versus ideal. What we would call it, like watch terminology, we'd say like the ideal energy of the site is that KPI is extremely valuable in a short time horizon. Like some of our alerts by default for performance will say this site or this inverter has deviated more than 10% for the last hour. That's actually indicative of not like potentially an intermittent issue. That's a real performance issue. And we've identified that for you in an hour rather than a month or 2 months. And that's not saying you're going to action it all the time, but it is saying we're putting the power and the control and the operator to surface up what we think are real problems worth looking through rather than trying to identify the problems, serve it up to them, and then give them all the information to say, hey, you know what? I need to action this right now because here's the trade-off and here's the payback we get. Or, hey, you know what? This is a loss, but it's a loss that is small enough that doesn't justify any action. We'll just wait until the next time we have to be on site for something else.
Do you think this will be different for this is multi-part because I'm trying to get this thought together.
Come
So
on. But
while you were talking, I was thinking about central inverters versus um, isolated inverters, where you just have, a couple of inverters on a long string versus this big central inverters that's just sitting in there. How does that data is it easier to get these KPIs when they have string inverters versus a central inverter?
um, so it depends, and I think that the level of detail you can get for any particular solar plant or inverter depends on the hardware, right? I think it depends on its configuration and its capabilities. Um, and I think there's pros and cons to both. I don't necessarily think or Watch has an opinion on like which is the right application. I
Yeah,
leave
yeah,
that
yeah.
to the people that design the projects. But I would say from a monitoring and optimization standpoint, usually if you're trying to get down to an MPPT or a string level, like the benefit of string inverters in a lot of cases is that you can get to a lower level of
Yeah.
granularity, and that's helpful for the operator because I think if you can say, hey, I can get this down not just to like a combiner box, but I can get that down another level or two
Yeah,
further.
but I know those
Uh,
they have some combiner boxes that have all that stuff kind of built in where you can
mhm,
segregate strings and arrays or arrays in strings in arrays before they go to a central inverter, which is very similar to having a string inverter where it's just going to that and you're monitoring these things. That's
mhm.
what that's what piqued my interest, and I was wondering, so does this require more sensor data that you're actually using with your devices, or is that just as it is, the way you're processing the data, you can build these digital twins so that you can understand what's happening? That's a long.
Yeah, yeah. It's again, I think what we can do is go to the lowest possible level that the hardware in play allows. And so, for example, like if we can get from the device string level voltage, power, and current, then
Mm.
that allows us to kind of use that as the lowest tier that you can get down to. I
Ah,
think if it doesn't share that level of detail, then I think you have to go up a level. And so what it means is it still really useful, still really powerful. Again, a large 5-10 megawatt site, still being able to isolate that down to a specific inverter or combiner box is hugely valuable for the technicians because they can then say, okay, what are the modules that are there? What are the inverters that are there? How do based on the data that I'm seeing, it's probably going to be a replacement that I'm talking to the vendor about, I can get the RMA set up. You still have a lot of value to be able to make your operations and maintenance as clear, focused, and focus more on like solving the problem rather than diagnosing the problem.
Okay.
But I just think it depends. It's like there are certainly different levels you can get down to based on what you have deployed on any given project.
You know, since 2008, that's when solar really started to take hold in the United States. 2008. And then we had these 25-year guarantees. And we understand they can't even make a car that lasts 25 years. So, but a car has moving parts. The thing about solar, it doesn't have a lot of moving parts. But now we're starting to see where some of these larger systems are needing to be retooled. When it comes to being repowered, how does Watch come into play with some of these systems that are a little antiquated, but they still have life? All you have to do is, put some new furniture in the room.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen like one car that gets to be that old, and you see it going down the road, and you're like, how is that car still running? Like, how does that work? Um, no, I mean, I think that the promise, and one of the things that initially, my not being in the space, all the way back then, but my perception of it in talking to a lot of asset owners and people
Yeah.
that build sites is that I think I don't always think that early on there was I don't think people were informed on what was necessary or required to maintain and keep the projects up for that level of lifespan.
I, I
I
think you're right.
I think a lot of people early on were things were installed and they're like, great, it's set up, it'll just run, and good luck. And one, I think anybody who's been in the space knows that like that's not reality. Like there is maintenance that needs to be done. There is, preventative maintenance. There is vegetation management. There
Oh,
is, even though things have warranties on them, that doesn't mean they're not going to break. It just means the company is going to stand by the product having a lifespan in total of a certain amount of time.
I've seen trees grow through a module.
Yeah.
Like somebody just set it, forget it. And do you come back and the earth reclaims everything? If not maintained, just the earth will reclaim it. So I think you're absolutely right. And the expectation was a very much a set it and forget it. And now people are starting to come to the conclusion like, hey, everything needs a little TLC every once in a while because you're starting to see a boom in O&M, or the conversation for O&M is starting to grow, where before we were like, nah. Um,
Well, I think the reality is that people now, as they develop and build out sites, bake in and make sure that they are talking about what is needed to maintain this site over its lifespan. And like, I think, folks like the Amicus O&M Cooperative and
yeah,
HeatSpring and other people like that are doing a really good job of teaching and training, what are the things that are necessary, to keep those up. But I think monitoring and the diagnostics on sites and portfolios matter too as part of that, because you need to use those as a check to make sure is the site performing that in the way in which you would expect at this given point in its life cycle. Like we know that there's degradation that you would expect over its lifetime. Are you seeing performance shift or go down faster than that planned degradation? You know, um, clearly those are the types of things that you want to be able to keep an eye on as someone that watches as a technical asset manager or a financial asset manager. You're looking for those things. So I think what the few of the problems, or I think the things that we solve for in those scenarios are: one, we keep an eye on that to make sure degradation is happening as planned. Two, if it's happening faster, we can help those owners identify where those performance gaps are occurring and isolate those problems faster. I think when it comes to repowering sites, some of the values of Watch's digital twin, and when we plug onto a new site, is we start reporting data and the model starts working the moment we get plugged into a new build. It's helpful at doing QA/QC to make sure, like, did the site actually get built
oh
per the
yeah,
construction plans?
yeah.
But I think, which is not always a given, I've come to learn. But on repower sites too, you also have value of saying like, all right, here's what we think the site should be doing, and here's all the assumptions. And when we go on and the performance models go, we'll say, hey, all right, so guess what? The site's at about 75% of its expected output. By degradation, it should be around 80 to 85%. And so it helps, I think, even in a repower scenario, people ascertain at least very quickly, hey, how is the site performing? And then it unlocks all the other stuff you would probably do downstream, imaging, drone flyovers,
Yeah.
physical inspection of the entire site. But you can start way earlier with the software and the model and say, just at a glance, how is this site performing based on its age and what we'd expect at this point in its life cycle?
Okay. All right. I'm about to get personal here with you. You ready?
Come on. Yeah, let's do it.
What's your favorite snack?
So I have three young kids. I don't have a lot of opinions on anything anymore. I'm usually like the cleanup guy and scavenging for, things that they've left over. But if I get to choose, um, I'm probably going to be salty and sweet. So I'm probably going to be like a kettle corn, popcorn, or something like that can scratch both of those itches.
Okay. What's your favorite dinner? What's your favorite dinner meal?
I'm a pasta guy. Like I'm going to make some sort of pasta all the time. Like I think, you know, I'm in a last meal type scenario. I'm probably going to have just a classic like pasta bolognese, like that someone's grandma would make.
That's a good one. That's a good one. What's your favorite movie?
Ooh, um, I'm kind of
No, no. Let me rephrase this
okay.
because what's your favorite movie of the 90s?
Ooh, okay. That helps focus it a little bit.
Yeah, because
I
I have a couple based on decade.
as a elder millennial, I think as we're called. There are a couple things that define my childhood. I'd say the one that jumps out right when you ask that is the Sandlot. I think that movie was
Really?
I think that was the 90s. That may have been a little bit earlier,
It
but for
was it
me,
was the
I'll pick that.
I think it was either the I think it was a late maybe it was.
You'll have to fact check me after we get done recording. If it's the 90s, great. If not, I will come up with some sort of amended answer later.
No, 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 no. That's fine. All right. What's your favorite band from the 90s?
I am, I think, going to forever be a disciple of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Really?
Yeah.
From the 90s.
Yeah, I think like their albums then, I mean, they obviously extended into the
Yeah,
2000s and,
Blood
and even
Sugar
later on.
Sex Magic is I've I've purchased that CD, broken that CD, bought the CD again,
Mhm.
got it on Spotify, but then bought the CD again just to have the CD because that thing is Rick Rubin produced it, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful. Masterpiece.
Yeah. What do I get to flip these questions back to you? Like, do I get to?
Sure, you can
Yeah.
try.
All right. Well. All right. It sounds like you like that one, but like, would you say what's your tops?
So, food, any stew. It could be lamb stew, it could be beef stew, it can be a chicken chili. Love them. That and soups. That's my food. When it comes to movies, give me a decade.
Go with the go with the 2000s, a time of great change.
Benjamin Button.
Okay.
These are ones I could watch. If it were the if it were the 90s, it would be stuck between Fight Club and The Usual Suspects.
You have so much better answers. Now I want my do over because those are both great. Those are both great.
All right, we went food. I'm not really a sweets person, but my wife gets these things from Austria, these little wafer like things. Oh, bro. Ever
Crispy, sweet. They have like something in the middle of them.
Yeah, it's like a one like if you take a Twix and take the chocolate out and put it in the middle and leave it, it's kind of like that.
Okay.
It's a and you only they only come in these one pack and I can only have one. These little bitty thing, but I nibble because it's so good. All
I
right.
know what to get you as a thank you for having me on now.
Oh
Now
no.
that I know, I just got to get the brands down.
Um See, my music is really weird because I'm a musician. So like all the music that I do for podcast, I write, produce, and create that stuff. So
Hmm.
I'm really into, I grew up listening to progressive jazz as a teenager and playing it. And then I got into gospel because I played in the church. And then that took me to blues. So I play in a blues band. So I like things that are interesting. Some of the new music now is too simple for me. It's just progressively just like that chord, a drum loop, no change, no bridge. It's just not interesting.
Yeah. What's your favorite instrument to play?
Guitar?
Okay, cool.
Actually, I like the bass as well. It depends because now I got a 5 string bass, and I just realized that you could do chord formations on a 5 string bass. Remember what I was telling you about Hiatus Coyote
Mhm.
song that is literally written on the bass, but you will think it's a guitar.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna check it out after we get done today.
And wait a minute. So we went food, music, movie. What's your favorite clothing item to wear?
If it were up to me, I don't like to tie myself to a lot of the typical technology stereotypes, but the one thing I liked about the Steve Jobs and the that era is that like clothing is something that you have to think about, and like in most days I'd rather not think about it. So I'm of the mindset that if I find something, and maybe this is kind of like most men in general, but if I find something I like, I'll buy it in 5 colors and I'll just wear that interchangeably. I probably have
That's right.
worn my Allbird sneakers. I bought a first pair in the beginning of the pandemic, like in 2020. And
Yep.
I think my wife at one point asked me a year or two into it, she's like, you do have a bunch of other shoes, but you just wear those every single day. And I found that like the 3 pairs I have on rotation, I just am happy to wear those all the time. So like it's one less thing to worry about on very busy mornings, typically.
Okay. And here's the last question. Are you coming to Chicago in a few weeks?
For Midwest Renewables,
Yes.
I'm up in the air about it. I know I was going to be coming up for I knew I would plan to be there in November for the RE Plus event, but that event and potentially the solar farm event in July were interesting. So I have a feeling I will
Wait a
be
minute.
up for
What
one of
solar
those.
farm event?
At least last year there was like a agrivoltaics based event that was in Chicago. I don't know if it's in Chicago again this year, but like last July, this July, um, specifically focused on a lot of people doing agrivoltaics.
If you remember what that is, shoot that to me.
Okay.
Because I'm just like, I'm not in the know. I am not in the know.
And that's the thing I found about being in this space the last couple of years. There are clearly like some very large marquee events, the SPI, RE Plus events, their regional events,
Yeah.
American Clean Power. So there's some like big ones that everybody goes to, but then there are all of these sort of, I would say, just more focused niche ones. And I think,
Those are the ones I'm interested in. Those,
but I think the danger is you could be somewhere any given week and be at some sort of a clean energy event
yeah,
somewhere in the country.
it used to be this. This was when I got into the industry. You had RA Plus, which was SPI back then.
Mhm.
Then you didn't really have anything because it was usually in September, October, whatever. Around that, everybody goes back to school time. Then the month of starting in late January through all of February, it was showtime.
Mhm.
And it slowed down in March, and then there were no shows till all right, SBI again. But now I look and there's one for um, financial tech that's related to PV. There's one for agrovoltaics. There's one for wheat growers of America who want to get into. It's just there's one everywhere, and then the large providers have done satellite shows, which is
Mhm.
cool. Um, I don't have that much money.
Or I think time. I'd say that like one, I love this. I love the space, and one of the things versus some of the other industries that I've been in is that everybody seems to come to a handful of these events, and they are
Yeah,
a great place to see your customers, see your potential customers, introduce people that you know to other people, like how we met,
yeah,
at NABSEM. I think the downside is that there is kind of an industry being made around events themselves. And I think what we're trying to do is find the right mix of time spent to share ideas, talk about best practices, build business relationships, the things you want to do, while also realizing that a lot of people are out actually building and setting up and running projects, so they can't be at events all
Yeah.
the time. And even if you can be, I think people want to be with their families. They want to have whatever their version of work-life balance is. And, I've met some people who typically are in the OEM or the hardware space, and I see them at every event that I go to exhibiting, and I'm like, you're at something every other week. Like, what about home life? What about family life? And so I think that, there's a great opportunity to participate meaningfully in a lot of things around share good knowledge, build good relationships, but also, I think there's a lot of pressure to be at everything, particularly if you're an
Yep.
entrepreneur or a small shop. And I
Yeah,
just think you got to pick where you want to spend your time and effort, because you can't be everywhere, to your point.
exactly. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the What's Up Solar podcast. It's great having you and to share the information so that people can understand some of the things that are available to them, some of the things, technology that how it's changing in this space that we have here. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. These are really fun conversations to get to have. I think as much as I sort of lead the business development and the sales, function here at Watch, I also think I see part of my job as the chief evangelist, that there are interesting options, interesting technology out there. And so whenever I meet somebody, the conversation is never like always 100% you should work with Watch. I think the thing I want to leave most people with is, hey, there are unique, progressive, interesting companies that can probably solve the problems that you have. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's us, sometimes that's somebody else. But like, for everybody, I'd say like, hey, don't settle for the status quo, because there are people trying to bring a lot of new capabilities and a fresh take on many of the things that you encounter, that all of the people that are listening to this encounter in their jobs day to day. So, seek those out, and you may be surprised by who you find and what you find out there. Um, for those folks that want to learn more about Watch, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Alex Heller. Watch, you can find us at Watch, kind of like how you spell What's Up. You can spell it with two T's. So wattch.io. And you can find more info and connect with us there.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, remember this, everybody. If you want to be in the know, you got to know where to go. And where to go is What's Up Solar Podcast. Remember, there's a lot of information. We're in a changing time. And it used to be you just paid a bill, you had a TV in your house, and you had some lights in your house. Now everything is connected in your home. There's solution to help offset the cost and to sustain the planet. And when you get into this space of renewables, you'll find out something that is very pertinent if you do it right. The sun never sends a bill. Till next time, love you all. Peace.